Hello and welcome to Virtual Tabletop Gaming Live. My name is Andrew Kolb. Thank you to Tabletop Gaming Magazine for having me. I am the creator, or I guess like the author, the illustrator, the cartographer of this book. So Neverland, a fantasy role-playing setting, which, as the kind of subtitle would allude to, is a kind of comprehensive or kind of full package setting inspired by Neverland, like the island of Neverland from the stories of Peter Pan and Captain Hook. So what I want to do today is talk a bit about kind of like what's included in the book, who is it for, but kind of as on the kind of like game master side of things, and then kind of quickly touch on a couple of aspects for like running the game or how to use it. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, so let's talk about kind of what's in the book and who is it for. So Neverland is kind of a comprehensive or kind of one-stop shop book. Like I've tried to design it so that way it has everything that you would need to run a game. There's the map for the full island. There are kind of individual maps for specific locations kind of dotted around the island. There are nearly 100 kind of characters, monsters, NPCs, all with stats, and many of them with kind of goals and wants and needs. And then there are kind of, not endless, it's a book, but there are a significant number of tables, both to kind of generate or inspire kind of further adventures, but also to kind of help answer some of the questions in the book as well, as characters ask, like, I search the body, what do I find? Things like that. So it is, I've approached this trying to design it for both kind of veteran and new game masters alike. It assumes that you have played a tabletop role-playing game before, and that you are relatively comfortable in that system, or comfortable enough that you can either take this content and adapt it or see how it can be used. While I've written it to lean towards 5th edition, it is absolutely flexible enough that it can suit other systems as well. For veteran game masters, it is full of content that you can like pick it up and go, but there are enough kind of gaps or kind of open areas or questions to be answered that you can still make this your own. You can also take content from other games or other books, monsters from other books, things like that, and fit them into Neverland if that suits the story or adventure that you're trying to kind of send your players on. For new game masters, what this island is, and actually this applies to any level of experience, the island is a hexcrawl setting. So what that essentially means is the kind of the full map of Neverland has been broken down into hexagons, each kind of 2 miles wide, and thus is meant to kind of promote the characters exploring, kind of going from hex to hex. Now each kind of area is dense with content, so the island lends itself to kind of a lot of repeat exploration, and you don't have to worry about if we stray too far, we'll never get back there. It's a nice kind of self-contained space, which I find is great for new game masters. You don't have to worry about filling out an entire world. Essentially, your characters get to the island, and we'll talk about how you can get there towards the end. But your characters get to the island and then they're off and running. You have everything you need in the book to set them on an adventure. And because the book is not designed so much with plot as it is with those kind of individual wants and needs of the kind of antagonists on the island, it's more about kind of player choice. So if the players decide to ally themselves with the pirates versus mermaids, then it'll be a very different adventure, but that'll mean something else when they come across a stranded mermaid in the river compared to, or if, well, what I'm getting at is there are lots of characters and it's player focused as opposed to them just kind of sitting and watching the game master just decide what's going to happen next. And that's it. So let's get into the kind of the meat of each kind of chapter. Okay, so let's get into kind of the general kind of structure of the book, or kind of what do you get when you pick up a copy? So I've broken down the book into kind of core chapters, so that way, hopefully if you have a question, you can quickly reference or know where to reference to find the answer. So getting into chapter 1, it's kind of the overall kind of concept of Neverland, or kind of the broad strokes of it. So it gets into kind of the general factions and the loose ideas of what each kind of group brings to the island. It talks about travel, both in the concept of like the hexcrawl, or how to run a hexcrawl, as well as kind of like secret ways to get around the island. It also discusses time, because I think in a hexcrawl, time management is a big part of it. As you move from hex to hex, that usually takes about 4 hours of travel, as does spending time in a hex to explore it. So there are always things going on. As your players spend time doing things on the island, things are happening. So there's a breakdown of kind of the time or the schedule of different factions. The crocodile, which kind of patrols the island, is this kind of giant behemoth Godzilla type creature. Also, I realize now that I'm going to be spoiling some of the surprises of the island, so I hope that's okay. A lot of Neverland is pretty familiar, or I've tried to keep it as familiar as possible. Like, I think what you would expect from an adventure in Neverland is still there, but I've tried to add as many twists or little extra details that make it unique, or at least make it specific or better tailored to a role-playing adventure. So the behemoth of a crocodile is a good example of that. But because it kind of patrols the island at certain times of the day, and it goes into a section of the island to lay eggs once a month, which then spawn into regular-sized crocodiles, it's important to have a sense of time, both for the players to know, oh, we shouldn't be in this area at this point, or we need to kind of get here before this happens. So I've also included kind of a clear schedule, as well as kind of a couple, there are a number of charts in the first chapter, which kind of relate to kind of the overall machinations of the island. And then it also gets into kind of the kind of social elements of the island. We get into kind of like detailed mechanics. So if you want to fly, how does that work? Or if you kind of get pixie dust, then how does that help with your flight and so on, as well as like how to run a chase scene in the jungle, and things like that. It also discusses fallen stars, which are a major kind of element of the island, and as I'll get into later, good for kind of adventuring. But because they are kind of points of, or sources of raw power, I should explain. Fallen stars are, well, stars that fall from the sky to the island of Neverland, which just seems to be like a natural magnet for them. But these stars, for a short time, just kind of like rest on the surface of the island, and are just kind of like crackling with kind of raw, I mean, well, harnessable, but like just raw, untamed magical power. So a number of the inhabitants of the island use them for different reasons, some as like batteries, some as kind of like small idols, but they add an extra element to the island that when a star falls, until it is harvested, it just kind of causes wild magic in the area. So it also kind of goes into detail as far as how that works, some of the effects if you cast a spell within the range of a fallen star without kind of properly harnessing it or protecting yourself from it. So Chapter 1 really kind of touches on the island in general. So that's Chapter 1. Okay, so Chapter 2. I will try to be as succinct as possible with going through each chapter, but I do think each part kind of fits into the kind of larger picture to create a kind of a complex tapestry that is Neverland. So Chapter 2 is kind of going into the cast of both kind of like creatures, individuals, groups, or factions, and each one is illustrated, so there's at least one reference that you can show your players for a sense of what they look like. They also all have their statistics, so that way if your players also want to fight them, they will have their own attacks and so on. Some are more dangerous than others, but that's life. Mechanically, so again, it's it's as system agnostic as I could make it. It does lean slightly towards 5th edition, but enough content is there that you should be able to adapt. I'm going to get into some crunchy stuff. Each creature or character in chapter 2 has only 3 saves or 3 statistics, unlike others which lean towards 6. The reason being that I've tried to streamline it into strictly kind of great, mediocre, and bad. So is this creature good at climbing? Then add the best stat. Or if they're not very smart, then give them the worst stat for that save. Hopefully this makes it simpler to run and also quicker to find the number that you need. Another element is that I've designed it in a way so that the first 2 numbers, the kind of like best and mediocre numbers, add together to be their to hit bonus. So in an attack, that is what you add to find that number. So again, to try to streamline it and make it use the space as efficiently as possible. And that's it for chapter 2. So lots of creatures, range of like skills, and some are more magic based, some are more kind of like physical. There's a good mix. And I should also say there's a range in the characters or in the creatures that should complement various levels of play. So whether they're all level 1 or 2 players coming onto the island trying to just like make a name for themselves, or they are like into double-digit levels and are really beyond kind of simple limitations like breathing and gravity, then there's lots here. And again, it's also flexible enough that you can bring creatures in from other systems or use these elsewhere. I'm open. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I'm open. It's fine. So that's it. That's chapter 2. Okay, so chapter 3. This is where the meat of the kind of like hexcrawl component is located. So each page has been dedicated to 1 hex of the island, which my goal is to kind of keep it as organized and easy to run at the table as possible. So I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen, or like well, you can see it now. So each page is set up with kind of like the general indicator of, or the name for that hex, as well as a quick kind of summary of what's included. Then there are a number of tables. So what I tend to do when players are moving from hex to hex is roll a d20, 2 d12s, and a d6. The reason being the d20 then first tells me what type of encounter there is, if any. Then the d12 tells me what the area effect is going to be, if it's going to be an area effect, or what creature they're going to run into, if they run into a creature, or if it's an NPC. And I roll 2, so that way if one of the encounters is kind of a combined encounter of like 2 NPCs or a creature and an NPC, then I have those numbers right away. The d6 I use for exploration if they want to explore, or if they want to, or if they come across like a nest of something, then that helps with that. One tip I have is if you want to do some of the rolls ahead of time, it still makes it random because it depends on where they show up and what, or where they explore and what hex they move to. But if you do those rolls of the d20 and the d12s and the d6 and just write out those numbers on like a list, then as your players explore, you can just find out those numbers and go from there. And because each hex is designed with the same number of encounters or the same tables, if you have the numbers 12 on your d20, then that'll be the same, or it's relevant no matter what hex they're in. Similarly, if you roll a 6 and a 7 on your 2 d12s, then it still works. So that's one way to avoid a lot of rolling at the table, if that's something that you want to kind of try to minimize. Alternatively, and if you are technologically savvy, then I've also set up a digital component. And if you don't mind having a screen at the table when you're playing, then you can see on the screen a link to Chartopia, which is a great resource, not affiliated with this in any way, but a free resource for random tables. And I've set up the random encounters for each of the 24 hexes of the island. So if you have that at the table and you just hit roll for that hex, it'll give you what the encounter is, and then also give you, if it's a thunderstorm, then it'll give you the effects of that thunderstorm and so on. So that's chapter 3. That's the island. Those are the hexes, and a couple of ways of how you can approach rolling that random stuff on the hex. Oh, and I should also say that if you want specific encounters, you can design those too. But I don't know. The surprises are fun. Okay, that's chapter 3. Okay, so chapter 4 is like a mild spoiler, or if you're here and you want to kind of likely run a game, so I think you're going to need to know. Chapter 4 talks about the realm of the fairies, which is kind of like just intrinsically linked with Neverland. So with this book, you're not just getting the setting of Neverland or the island, which is a very strict, regimented, like hexcrawl system. You're also getting the world of the fairies, or Elfame. So Elfame works a little differently and is kind of a complement by contrast to Neverland, where you have a clear sense moving through Neverland of like, I can see that landmark and I'm going to move towards it, and I will get closer, as you would expect travel to work. Elfame works a little differently. It depends on what your goals are, what your intentions are with the fairies. It can affect any number of things. The fairies are tricky, and living or existing in their world is even trickier. So the chapter starts off with a number of kind of like rules and customs and things for you as the game master to know how to run it, as it is quite different from running Neverland, and then continues on into kind of the regions of Elfame. So it doesn't work in a clear map system, which is also why you don't need to worry about having a map, because even though they think they just went from the kind of like forest full of ponds to the kind of like field of gates, that connection isn't necessarily the same every time. So it can be frustrating to get a grasp on as players, but because I've put all the regions onto one double page spread, you as the person running it should have a good kind of grip on reality. So you can be the tether while they get into trouble. So that's it. Chapter 4 kind of touches on everything you should need to know to run the world of the fairies. And now going back to chapter 2 with all the cast, or with the characters, all of the kind of fairies that inhabit the fairy world, or Elfame, are included in chapter 2 as well, and are quickly denoted by a little floral element beside their name. So right there, oops, yeah, there we go. So they can be flipping through the book and have no idea. These are your players, but why are they flipping through your book? You're the one running the game. I digress. That's chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 5. This is the kind of like resources of the book, like for you as the game master. The maps, all of the kind of random tables are all included here for quick reference. So a couple things that I want to touch on, because I won't show too much of or go into too much detail for the maps, but I've tried to keep most of the maps. Some of them, most of the like reasonably sized maps can all fit onto a single page with their keyed elements. Things like the Jolly Roger, I've also included some quick ship terms, so that way you can pretend you know what to say as a pirate. The Mermaid Cove, which is kind of the amphitheater where the mermaids perform their mermaid concerts. I've included 2 sample concerts for you to reference, so hopefully there's enough here that it can at least give you a starting point. But two kind of outliers from that are the iron mines and the skull. So the iron mines are kind of like in the heart of Neverland, and how it works is it's essentially a number of rooms in the mines, and the tunnels change constantly. So you as a game master can limit how far they explore or change it so every time they go in it's different, which also kind of keeps it fresh for you running the adventure, and for your players who know, oh, I mean, we don't know what to expect, like this time it could be completely different. So that's one component that is kind of always changing, and also a pretty big dungeon or like kind of cave system to explore. The other one is the skull, which like is the kind of large skull-like rock structure floating, or not floating, but like just resting out in at the edge of the island. And it is not just a rock formation, it is the skull of a kind of ancient being. So going into the this kind of skull-like formation is entering kind of like another kind of like demi-plane, or kind of another plane of existence. So how the skull works is it's essentially like a Mad Libs for dungeon design. So there are 100 like quick stat monsters and 100 quick rooms that you can fill in based on how your players answer questions, or based on things they've recently seen, because the mind of this kind of ancient, incomprehensible being affects what the players are going to experience. So they could go in, and because they're trying to save a mermaid, all of the rooms are covered in coral and all of the monsters are aquatic. Or because the characters are going in to reclaim a weapon that was lost in there, then everything in the rooms are based off of the player's fears, and all of the monsters reflect that. So again, it's another area that can allow for repeat exploration, and no two trips are the same. So in this chapter, it includes, again, those tables for filling out the map and how to kind of map out the skull, which can be as big or as small as you want, as well as the kind of monsters to populate it. But it's also a good spot that if you want a specific adventure, or like a specific detour from the main adventure of Neverland, then a great spot to slot it in, because I mean, if you as a game master have always wanted to run a tiny like murder mystery, then have them go into the skull, and all of a sudden they're in a kind of ancient Gothic mansion with rain, and they can't escape. So if you are looking for a level of flexibility on top of kind of a lot of great structure, then the hope is that between the mines and the skull, there is always going to be something that's different in Neverland. And then as far as the random tables are concerned, I've tried to include as much that could be relevant to running the game as possible, both for answering questions and for building new adventures or ideas. Like if you're trying to figure out who is going to give them the next quest, but you don't always want it to be the mermaids or the lost boys, then there's a great chart to just roll a d20 and figure out what NPC gives the quest. Things like that. There are objects, there's loot, there is, because those fallen stars are surges, or cause surges of kind of intense magical energy. There's a star surge table that if a character casts a spell while holding or near a star, then crazy and magical things will happen, so you can roll on that as well. And that's chapter 5. Those are the resources included in Neverland. Okay, so the book wraps up with a couple of things. There are a number of short stories that I've written set in the world of Neverland that I've formatted to, or have designed to look like pages from a chapter book. You can use them for inspiration. They're also kind of great handouts if you want to flesh out or expand on the world, and give, not backstory, but kind of like give another way for the players to interact with Neverland. Also great that you can like include maybe there's a secret message written on the back of a page of the book, or a map, or like a message from an ally who needs to communicate discreetly. So there are a number of stories, and then at the end we included or have a number of kind of pre-generated characters. So if you want to kind of run a game on the fly, there's a lot right here. Rip them out. It's perforated, so it's not going to do too much damage, but take them out, photocopy them, reuse them as many times as you'd like. And then also at the back of the book is kind of like further resources that I would recommend to kind of complement Neverland. So that kind of goes back to Chartopia for rolling your digital encounter, or rolling encounters digitally. There's also kind of a reference for music, other adventures that I think would complement or work with Neverland well. None of them are affiliated, they're just like things I love, and other resources that I think are worth checking out. And that's it. That's the end of the book. So thank you again to Tabletop Gaming Magazine for having me, and for letting me kind of talk about Neverland. The book is... I got distracted by holding up the cover. The book is available for pre-order until October 6th. At which point it's available. So you can find it wherever books are sold, both like reading books and game stores. So check it out. If you want to find me or talk to me about kind of role-playing games or Neverland, then you can see on the screen I've included both my website and a couple of social media handles to connect. So there you go. Thanks for checking out Neverland. Bye.